a flash of bluish white light from out of nowhere. Today, we're going to find out what happened to an orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Cicoria when he got struck by lightning. Welcome to Stories of Music and the Brain, episode number 1. Hey, my friends, this is Saint Luminous, and welcome to the very first episode of Stories of Music and the Brain. I'm very excited, actually, to talk about this with you because, I have epilepsy, so I have some neurological issues, and I'm just fascinated to know what happens with the brain and music. This is just something that it's incredible the more you find out about this sort of thing. So I wanted to start with Dr. Cicoria and his amazing story. And there's a lot of these stories I'm going to talk about that they come from a book by Dr. Oliver Sacks called Musicophilia. So if you get a chance, let's read it. But I want to discuss this first story about Dr. Cicoria. So Dr. Cicoria was I think he still is an orthopedic surgeon, and he was in his 40s, and he was a well-known surgeon in his small town. And so one day he was struck by lightning, and this is where he says he saw that bluish white light from out of nowhere. So he was at a payphone. A what? A payphone. That tells you how long ago this was. Suddenly struck by lightning. So apparently he was knocked backwards. He says he had an out-of-body experience. He floated above his body and he could see his body laying there. And he felt a sense of calm to see, okay, I'm not in pain. I'm okay. When suddenly he realized he came back to life. And he knew he was back to life because he felt some pain. So, because he had burns. When he got struck by lightning, he had burns on his body. So, of course, after this happened, he went to a cardiologist. He went to a neurologist to get a lot of testing done. EEGs, MRIs. And these tests didn't show anything amiss. Besides the burns, really, he was doing quite well, considering he'd been struck by lightning. So now, check this out. Dr. Cicoria, after a few days and healing, starts to go back to work. I think it had been a couple of weeks, and Dr. Cicoria started to go back to work. Well, he had some memory issues. So he was forgetting the names of some diseases, the names of some things, the names of some of his coworkers. But other than that, he still had his skill to do surgery. All right, fine. After a couple more weeks, now he starts to remember the names of his patients and names of his colleagues. So actually, he felt, this is probably 4 to 6 weeks after the lightning strike, that life was just back to normal. But lo and behold, he suddenly felt for a period of 2 or 3 days, after he felt things were finally back to normal, he had this sudden urge to listen to piano music, specifically classical music. And it's weird because he didn't have any interest like this in music. It's not something he'd go out of his way to suddenly get. But he had this urge. He said there was nothing he could do about it, this urge to listen to music. It's unusual for him because he wouldn't listen to classical. The only time he really ever listened to music, he'd put on some rock music. Good man. So Dr. Cicoria, he went and he started buying all these records. I'm assuming probably CDs since this was the 90s. But he started buying all these recordings, and he particularly fell in love with music composed by Chopin and performed by a musician named Ashkenazi. And so he fell in love with music like this. Now, Dr. Cicoria really, besides a few lessons when he was a young boy, he had no musical training, no interest in music. Like a lot of people out there, it's It's cool, it's there. Sometimes, I like to put on some music. But suddenly he had this urge to buy all the sheet music. Well, buy all the recordings and then go and buy all of the sheet music and then to try and learn it. Fortunately, too, his babysitter needed a place to store her upright piano. Wasn't a baby grand or a grand or anything like that, but it would do. And so it satisfied his urge to not only listen to all these recordings, but to actually play. So he bought all the sheet music because he wanted to learn how to play this stuff. Now, on the heels of all this, of this sudden urge to listen to all this classical music, and it was every day this urge was there, and he tried to learn it, probably in vain because he wasn't trained on how to read sheet music. And, you heard a little bit there. It's very complicated stuff. This is not something for an amateur to just start playing. It's not going to happen. But on the heels of all this, Dr. Cicoria suddenly started to hear music in his head that he'd go throughout his day, and in his dreams he dreamt that he was in a tuxedo performing a concert of his own music to everyone, and he woke up and the music was still playing in his head. Now, I don't know about you, but this happens to me quite often, that there's music in my dream. Somehow I'm listening to it or I'm writing it somehow, and then I wake up and the song is fresh in my head. And some of these times I actually go ahead and just bust out my phone and I sing into it. Half the time is just gibberish. I don't know what the fuck that was I recorded in the middle of the night. Other times I'm like, oh yeah, no, I remember that. And I've tried writing songs with this sort of stuff, and maybe you might hear it someday. I don't know. But still, Dr. Cicoria says that that this music was in his brain. He said it was nonstop. The music would not stop inside his head. In fact, the only way it stopped is he had to forcibly stop himself from listening to this music that was inside his head. So now Dr. Cicoria is in an interesting position because not only is he struggling to learn how to play these classical pieces, which is interesting because he's struggling because he has no training. And as you know, a lot of people, when they start to learn how to make music and start to learn instruments, they give up because it's such a struggle. If they're trying to read sheet music, they come to a crossroads because they find out, wow, this is very difficult, and they give up. But for some reason, Dr. Cicoria, this passion from out of nowhere didn't stop him. Even though he couldn't read the sheet music or play it the way he wanted, he could not stop himself. He wanted to know how to do it. Oh, I forgot. So when Dr. Cicoria woke up from his dream with all this music in his head, he rushed downstairs furiously to try and notate the music that was coming from inside his head, but he didn't know how because he had no training on how to notate music. Very interesting. I didn't read anything where he had a device to record it. So this is the 90s, so he probably didn't have a phone where he could just sing into it. All right, so now Dr. Cicoria has a struggle because he's trying to learn how to play Chopin. Very complicated pieces. Listen to some Chopin after this. I may even put some links. I think I will. I'm going to put some links to some Chopin music below. Listen to that stuff. An amateur is not going to be able to just sit down and in a couple of weeks just play this. It's very complicated and wonderful music. Not only was he trying to do that, he was trying to figure out, how do I notate all this music in my head that I'm hearing? It's not from the recordings. This is some other music that's coming from someplace else, and I want to try and capture it so I can write it and play it on the piano. Dr. Cicoria says, I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would play until it was time to go to work. Then I'd come home from work and I'd play all evening long. Needless to say, my wife was not pleased. So now imagine this. After 3 months, Dr. Cicoria, a family man, happily married, just goes to his job in his little town as an orthopedic surgeon, is now somebody who is indifferent to the music. Just, hey, let me put on some rock. It seems like a good Saturday afternoon to put on some rock music. Suddenly, somebody like that was inspired and nearly possessed by music. And maybe some of you know what it means, what it feels to be possessed by music. I know that's an accurate description for me because it's in my head all day long. So Dr. Cicoria, he felt that this music that was coming to him in his head, interestingly, he felt spiritual about it. He felt like this was a gift given to him from the music from heaven was being given to him as a gift. This is how he felt about the whole thing. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Dr. Cicoria did get a teacher. And as the story goes, he even went to some sort of camp where a lot of budding composers got together to work on their craft with another well-known composer, and he performed some of his pieces, and I think a piece from Chopin or Mozart. I don't remember now. And it did well. The teacher for the program was very impressed with him. Well, as it turns out, so what is the conclusion with all this? As it turns out, Dr. Cicoria is still an orthopedic surgeon, but he got divorced. He got into a motorcycle accident. That was life-threatening, but he lived through it. So despite the divorce, despite the life-threatening motorcycle accident, he still woke up every morning with music in his heart and mind. And looking this up, it looks like Dr. Cicoria in 2009 released some of his own music, about 27 minutes of his own music. So it's out there on Spotify to stream, and I'm going to put a link to that right down below. So you can listen to some of this music from a guy who had no interest in music, struck by lightning, suddenly he's possessed by it. So where is this all leading eventually? No one knows. Even the author of this book that I'm telling you about, Musicophilia, Dr. Oliver Sacks, he says he's not really sure why that happens, why there is suddenly this intense passion for music that won't go away. Because this is very different than a lot of people. And this is maybe you, that you get really interested in music. You see your favorite guitar player, you see this guy or this gal, this woman, rocking out, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to learn guitar. And you get a guitar, you go through lessons, and you find out, 99% of you are going to find out, wow, this is actually incredibly difficult, and it's much harder than I thought it would be. And that initial passion you had suddenly starts to be taken over by this sudden realization, gosh, I'm not really making the progress like I thought. I'm not becoming the rocker or the rock god that I thought I was going to be. Or, the kids, I have a job, I have a spouse, I have this, my friends want to get together. And so all those dreams kind of come down. And so a lot of people just keep it as a hobby or just pick it up, maybe once a month or twice a year, something like that. But imagine somebody like Dr. Cicoria, where it wasn't just something he picked up for the hobby. It was something eating away at him in a good way with music, this passion that would not go away. Even when he couldn't play it or understand it, it would not stop within him. And this is just one of those many stories about music and the brain that I just find fascinating. What happened when he got struck by lightning? What happened in the brain that made him suddenly possessed by music? Oh, and the last thing I want to say about this. Remember how I started the story? He got struck by lightning a couple of weeks after. He wasn't interested in music still. He was getting his life back together. Burns are healing, but he's having some memory issues. Another 2-3 weeks later, the memory issues have pretty much faded away. Life is back to normal, but suddenly he's possessed by this music that wasn't there before. So it was at least a month, maybe somewhere maybe 6 or 8 weeks between when he got struck by lightning and suddenly this urge for music. He didn't wake up from the lightning strike with all this music in him. There was this gap of time. Really strange. You guys, if you like stories like this, please let me know in the comments. Seriously, let me know if you're digging stories like this. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, go ahead. click over here right now, subscribe to this channel, and tap the bell so you can be notified the next time I put up a video. Go ahead and tap up here, click over here for another video. And thank you for listening to our first episode of Stories of Music and the Brain. I'll see you soon.